No racks were harmed in the making of this video. Welcome back, friends. Happy Monday. I hope you're all doing well. Front racks are a curious thing. You know, I have to be honest, it's a bicycle accessory that I spent a very long time not thinking anything about. But once I did, you would think that there'd be a million of them out there, and I guess probably there are. There just don't seem to be a lot of good ones, or at least ones that work for what I'm going to use it for. When I first started doing all this, you know, playing with Rivendell's and Surleys and things like that, you know, we had Nito front racks. You had M18s, you had that, I think it's 32F, and then eventually we got the Marks rack, which was basically Rivendell's design. It was a M18, but with a diving board and two struts, which gave it a little more support and allowed it to hold a little bit more weight. And that was really it. And if you were using a Rivendell, putting it on a Rivendell or a bike that had the fork braze-on where Rivendell puts it, everything was fine. The problems arose when you tried to take that M18 or that Marks rack and use it on a bike like a Surley, where the braze-on is lower on the fork and it didn't reach, which meant you had to buy, you know, a longer set of stays, which, you know, they're not inexpensive. So a handful of years ago, SimWorks got with Nito and had them make the Obento rack, which very quickly became my preferred front rack. It's got all of the elegance of a Surly or of a Nito rack, you know, fillet brazed by hand. They're just beautiful racks. It also has always struck me as somewhat ridiculous that we take these, the royal we take these very nice front racks, which are, again, not inexpensive, and we zip tie a very inexpensive wire basket to it. But that's what we do. The nice thing about the Obento rack is that it's got a diving board and it's got two sets of struts, but the struts are much longer. So the way you can set that up is you can set it up with the diving board and you can put the two sets of struts to the midpoint braze-on on the fork. That's a really kind of simple but nice looking way to do it. It keeps the bottom of the fork, you know, those braze-ons on the bottom of the fork clear if you want to put fenders on the bike. It works really well. You can also use the diving board, use that middle point on the fork, and then take the end strut and put it all the way down to that bottom braze-on. Now that theoretically might give you a little bit more support if you have a tendency to overload the front end of the bike, which, by the way, you shouldn't do. It's all good so far. But what if you use a bike that's got, say, rim brakes? You're using a cantilever or a V-brake, and for whatever reason you don't want to use that diving board. Well, if you've got braze-ons at the top, like on this long haul trucker fork, well, then you can use I guess the back, the strut that's closest to you, and move it up to the top, and then run that second strut either to the middle or to the bottom. I do want to mention that I tried to molest these racks as little as possible when I did it, but I felt like I needed to kind of get them together to a certain extent to hopefully help demonstrate this a little bit better. because I got to put these things back in the package, and somebody out there watching this may end up buying this rack, and I just want you to know, rest assured, the prices will not be marked up just because it was in this video. So you got 3 really solid ways you can attach this Obento rack. The rack itself is wider than an M18 or a Marks rack by just a little bit. It's still not obtrusive. I still think it looks really, really nice. As I mentioned last week, the prices on these things have gone up to the point now where even I kind of start to, it gives me pause. So what's the other option? Well, the other option would be the flat pack rack from Velo Orange. Still a nice looking rack. Arguably, you know, the fit and finish is not quite as nice as what you're going to get from Nito. The hardware is a little different. I mean, so you open the box, and I mean, you've got a whole bag full of nuts and bolts and whatnot to deal with. It's, if you've put a front rack or anything like that on a bike before, you know, it's pretty easy to figure out what goes where. They don't use a diving board. They use this rod, which without the bolt in it kind of makes me think of the disc wheel adapter that Silka used to make, that we lovingly refer to as the crack pipe. I will say that with the Velo Orange rack, you get all the hardware you need. So I don't know that I've ever seen a Nito rack that had the long bolt that you put through the crown of the fork for the diving board. You always have to kind of come up with that on your own. With the Velo Orange, you know, you're going to get the long bolt and the nut. And the hardware itself is kind of reminiscent of what like Tubus uses. It's that kind of setup. You know, again, in my thinking, not quite as elegant as the setup that Nito uses, but it works just fine. You still have 2 sets of struts. They're not as long as the struts that come with the Obento rack, but they're long enough to again get to that midpoint, mid-fork braze-on a Surly. In the picture, you know, I would have had to cut it to actually make it, to bolt it up and make it look like it's supposed to look, but you're in the same situation. You can use the 2 back struts to that top braze-on and just forget about this entirely, or you know, you can use both of them to the, you know, to the midpoint and use the center bolt. There's a lot of different ways that you can set this up depending on your bike. The platform itself is a little bit larger than the Obento rack. The Velo Orange rack has another little trick up its sleeve in that it doesn't come, because it all comes flat, the tombstone is not attached to the rack. So it comes with both that tombstone, the backstop, but it also comes with a deck lure. So if you were going to use this with a rando bag, you've got everything you need. You just use that top piece in lieu of the backstop, and the deck lure attaches to your bag, and you're done. So 2 really solid front rack options, I think. And honestly, I've looked at a bunch and I haven't found any that I like as well as these 2. If you've got a favorite, this would be a great time to put that down in the comments, and I'll check it out, and maybe I'll find another one that I like really well. Obviously, if you have any questions, put them down in the comments. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope something good happens to you today.